This is your daily real estate syndication show. I'm your host, Whitney Sewell. Today, we've packed a number of shows together to give you some highlights. I know you're going to enjoy the show. Thank you for being with us today. Michael, welcome to the show. Honored to have you on. It's not often we have guys on who are experts in development or ground up construction. And so I'm looking forward to diving into that. I know there's a lot of listeners who are thinking, hey, maybe I could do that sometime in the future, or is that for me? Or well, what is it really? Or how do I learn how to do that? And I know we're going to dive into some of that with you. So welcome. Let's dive into who Michael is though first, and then we'll get into what is ground up construction. But how did you get into ground up construction and give us some background?
Sure. My firm is based in the Chicago metropolitan area. I have some capital partners. We are a multi-generational firm. My son is the fourth generation in our family to be in real estate, multifamily apartments. He's a member of our firm, a principal in our firm. So I'm the third generation. And I've been through the gamut over the years of various aspects and pivoted as times change in the real estate business, focusing on multifamily, but riding the condominium conversion phase, the renovation of apartments, buying existing stabilized properties and getting value and improving them, as well as doing brand new construction projects, largely of garden style suburban communities, the number of buildings and clubhouses and on-site management. Of late, we have found, given the market and given valuations that existing stabilized properties are bringing at very low cap rates, that in the last 5 years or so, we pivoted exclusively to doing ground up new construction development because we find that if we underwrite it correctly and minimize the risk of where we're building, that we can build to a much higher yield than if we were to buy an existing building at today's yields and today's cap rates.
Okay, that's incredible. I want to jump into that and just how you have lowered the risk and how you're that. I mean, I love that focus on whatever it may be as well. Like we believe this, we know this. This is why we're moving this direction, and so I want to jump into that. But first, what does that mean to you? If somebody says ground up construction, and maybe we can talk about that. You all have done different things, right, in real estate, especially over the fourth generation is now part of the business. That's incredible, by the way. No doubt you all have had your hand in lots of different asset classes potentially or done different things, but maybe speak to ground up construction versus heavy renovations and just what ground up construction is.
Right. Well, I mean, the obvious differentiating factor and starting point is buying an existing building with heavy renovation. You're working with an in-place infrastructure, in-place ceiling heights, in-place sewer and water capacity, walls, bearing walls, and you're kind of limited as to what you can do. One of the things that I love about ground up new construction is that we're really dealing with a blank slate. So we're able to create a property, the amenities and the structure that appeals to today's top amenities and what a renter's looking for. We typically find and purchase either a raw piece of land, which is in the areas we like to develop kind of rare, or a piece of land that has a use on it that's really either obsolete or no longer producing enough revenue. What properties that have old rundown motels on them and right now, what properties that have tire repair center and wreck them. And occasionally we find a true piece of raw land and improvement and literally start from the ground up, which is why it's called ground up construction, and put in the infrastructure, including the sewer and water capacity and electric capacity, underground lines that go into the foundation of the buildings, and then design buildings and amenities that meet today's standards, what renters are searching for.
Yeah, that's awesome. Sometimes, or like you mentioned, there's already some kind of structure there. You're kind of having to start before the ground up, right? I mean, you're having to demolish something or demo something and go through a big process before even being able to start your project potentially. You mentioned putting in sewer and infrastructure and those processes. I want to get into those as well. But maybe as we do that, you could walk listeners through some steps involved in building up ground up commercial building and even maybe even start like with that tire business or whatever it was. You're having to remove that structure potentially. I'm sure there's things you're having to consider as you're thinking about this old business that were there. I was just thinking about whether fuel stations and things like that that have stuff underground. And oh man, there's many things you're gonna have to think through before maybe you build a residential property there, right? So maybe walk us through some of those steps that are involved in ground up commercial and what the listener should be thinking about it, especially if they're considering moving into that asset class or being able to start doing ground up on their own when maybe they've been buying existing multifamily or something like that.
Yes, there's a lot, and you mentioned some of the concerns. There are many concerns from start to finish, even to getting to the breaking ground stage. And typically, unlike starting with an existing structure, where once you close, you actually have the keys and you have a revenue producing property, there's a very long timeline in the development process. And the first part, or some of the things that you referred to, are the pre development stage, which takes a number of months. It takes a number of months after getting a piece of property tied up on a contract with some due diligence period, putting up some earnest money, do the due diligence necessary to see what will fit on the land, to actually spend some money with engineers to look at those infrastructure needs, spend some money with an architect for some preliminary plans as to what builds. And as you mentioned, one of those items is environmental issues. The tire repair place is an obvious one, but any piece of land that's going to be reused requires at least a phase one. And then if there are issues going on to a phase two and perhaps drilling some borings to make sure there's nothing miserable underneath the ground that needs to be cleaned up and that needs to be factored in the cost. It's also important, regardless of the environmental condition of the site, to do soil sampling and borings in order for our construction crews and our general contractor to be able to assess the ability to build the foundation and how big of a building that ground will support. It's one of the due diligence items we look at. And we spend a lot of time throughout the process, typically working with a local municipality to make sure they're receptive to the concept of multifamily. And in almost 100% of the cases, it's very, very rare to find a site that is fully zoned and entitled as a matter of right to support a multifamily use. So getting the entitlements from the local municipality and going through their process is also part of that due diligence period. When you do ground up construction, like I'm describing, and become a developer, there are considerable pre-development costs. We call them chase costs, some of the things I outlined that you just have to go at risk for in advance. And knowing that there's a possibility that you may have a deal that, for whatever reason, does not move forward. That's certainly one of the risks, and it requires some initial capital that you're willing to risk on the deal. Deal goes, you can absorb it, but if it doesn't, well, you've got to write off the chase costs.
Yeah, that's so many things to think through. And I know we're going to talk about a number of them
Yeah,
over a series of shows here, but that's a great
sure.
start. And to help us start thinking about that, I think that's probably one of those risks, right? Or something, especially someone getting started is considering when they think about those pre-development or chase costs. And can you speak to, as far as maybe there's a way that you could give us to help think through what to expect on those costs? I know it could be so much in the air about what might happen, what might have to be done, depending on the project itself. Is there a way up front though? Because I know you don't always know exactly what you're getting into, right? When you may begin a process like that.
Yeah.
But how do you all, I guess, justify and think through the risk of the amount of that pre-development cost?
Yeah. Well, first thing we do because of those costs, and it's hard, as you mentioned, to exactly quantify, but we have general idea, having done this a number of times, about what it would cost per deal, which I'll share in a minute. But one of the things we do before we start pulling the trigger on spending money is we do a couple things before that to help ensure our success. The first is we look at the market that we targeted and we make sure that existing rent levels are at a sufficiently high margin that it can be profitable to build and move forward with projects. We also look at occupancy rates of other existing apartment communities in the submarket to make sure that they're running at high occupancy levels and there's not a lot of vacancy, which tells us that there's demand in the marketplace for it. And then we, of course, first deal with the sellers of the properties that we're engaged in. The good news and the bad news is it's sometimes a likely process to get under contract and to convince them to go under contract with us subject to a due diligence period that is typically longer than a straight up sale of a stabilized product. That's because we need time for all these things and to put up some earnest money with them. And it's refundable up to the due diligence period. But the good news is that after you get past that hurdle, that you have a seller that understands the process and why it takes time, you have time internally to figure these things out and to gradually pull the trigger on expenses rather than diving in all at once, to gradually take it a step at a time. So after we take care of getting comfortable with the market and actually tying up the land, we will actually go and we've learned to make a call to the director of planning or development at the local municipality we're dealing with. We usually go in person, have a meeting, and share our plans for the site and get a reaction from the city whether or not they'd be amenable to it. They sometimes don't tell you on the spot, but they'll get back to you after they've talked to some of the people on the planning commission and after they talk to their local city council. And that feedback is very, very important. Because in our case, at least, if we get feedback back from a city that they have no interest in multifamily on that particular piece, or they're not willing to support it, we actually pull the plug at that point before we start spending money. We have found the old saying, can't fight City Hall, to be true. We only move forward with a project and go through all the various steps. We know that at least the planning department of the city will support our project and our concept.
And speak also to you had mentioned early on about why you all like ground up. And you talked about the lowered risk because the business plan or the location, those things. Could you elaborate on that some?
Sure, we do a fair amount of detailed analysis, and we only operate in submarkets that we've been in and are really comfortable with knowing the market on. And then we use outside third party sources to support our own research. We fortunately are all now in an industry where there's lots of data available, accurate data for places like CoStar and Yardi and some others, where there's really comprehensive reporting on rent rates, and apartments.com, which happens to be owned by CoStar, great place to do rent surveys in any submarket, and draw a little map around our site and go out 1 mile, 3 miles, or 5 miles and identify virtually every apartment complex there is. There's data on the age of those properties, amenities, and the rent. Quickly figure out what a rent per square foot is in that market so that we can begin do a pro forma income and expense statement. And we actually, once we get to the stage where we're rolling and we're starting to spend money on engineering and architectural plans, we get our general contractor involved in pricing. And we also engage one of several third-party independent market research firms that do a market study for us. They really are relatively cost effective, not as much as someone think. They're great data on the market, what the future demand is, on employment trends, on rents, and they confirm our rent assumptions. Also very, very useful report to have when it comes time for making a presentation to the lenders for financing for the project, where instead of just listening to the developer's story, the bank can rely on an independent third party's data and analysis. And that gives us a real good feeling for, at least in today's dollars, what our revenue will be once the project is finished.
Okay. Go ahead.
We then obviously have to construct on the income and expense statement, the expense side of it. Pretty good at that. So are appraisers that we have relationships with because of the number of properties we operate. We have an idea of what it costs in each category to operate in today's dollars, a finished community. And from that, we're able to come up with a realistic projection of what net operating income would be.
As we dive into ground up construction, what does that look like? What does that mean? Those things that we covered in the last segment. But I want to spend time with you now diving into and how to win that local government's approval, right? And entitlements. I mean, just it's difficult, right? Sometimes and sometimes more difficult than others. But I want to just hear from your experience and let's help the listener and myself to do this better, right? And have a higher potential level of success on winning the local government's approval. So let's dive in there and what that looks like for you all.
Right. Well, I think the first key is to provide the local government with a product that you and a good city planner have determined is actually good for the city, not just good for the developer. And very often, do our homework in advance. We're able to derive the goals and the needs of a city by reading their master plan. They usually have a master plan for development. They usually, over the years, have had studies done. It's available online through the city municipality on the needs of the community. And very often in today's environment, frankly, most forward thinking cities and municipalities with professional planning departments are looking for a variety and a diversity of housing product. They're looking to provide both single family home for sale environments for people that want to live and work in the community. But more and more, they're looking for quality rental housing for people that want to live and work in the community, but maybe either can't afford a down payment on a home or by choice choose to rent because they're taking a job that might be for 2 or 3 years and they don't know if it's going to work out, or they're a young person just starting out. Maybe they were born and raised in the community and they're moving out of their parents' house for the first time and they want to stay in the community because their job is there, their friends are there. There's some retail and entertainment options that they happen to like in the town. And more communities are receptive to the idea of rental housing, especially professionally managed and quality construction in their communities as broadening the type of housing type that's available. So that's a good way to get off to a good start and to initially propose it. We also have found, for us at least, when we go in and discuss a particular project, is to come in with a plan that does not max out or exceed the zoning and building code requirements within the zoning district that we're asking for. For example, if we're asking for a multifamily zoning and that zoning district allows up to 4 stories in height, and let's say a particular size parcel, 190 units, we'll come in with a plan that's either 2 stories or 3 stories in height with 150 units. And we'll make a point of the fact that we intentionally are doing a very low density site that will contribute much less of a problem to traffic, which is always an issue that's a trigger for neighbors and for the city. It'll have less of an impact on parks, on school districts, which is another item that they're always looking at, and will fit in with the neighborhood and be a differentiator as compared to other more dense or higher rise apartment buildings in their city. So that's been our approach. There are other developers that will just max the site in terms of density. They tend to run into more opposition, both from neighbors and from the city. We have found that it worked for us. We also very, very much are increasingly into heavy beyond code required landscaping on the site to really make it beautiful. Lots of trees to make it environmentally friendly, some natural areas and dog walking areas and doggy parks, and to meet and exceed energy code requirements so that the deal that we're proposing is very environmental friendly. Today, a cause and an attraction for municipalities is electric vehicle charging stations. Put them in from the get-go, hard to do an existing property. We also put the infrastructure in to add them while we're still before we pave so that we can do the conduit piping underground. And use all energy efficient materials when we do our building so that we like to present a project that the professional planning staff and administration at the city could easily sell to their planning commission and to the neighbors and to their city council. We try to work with them and make their job easy rather than fight them and push for more.
I think you hit the nail on the head even in the last comment there. I mean, you're working with them, trying to make their job easier. I mean, and as you develop that relationship, no doubt that's going to help you to get more approvals in the future. Also, when does it happen that you need to present to the community like you were talking about? And what does that process look like?
So we do that a little different as well. We found a really good recipe for success. The legal, technical, formal requirement everywhere is that once an application for rezoning or variances is submitted, gets on the agenda of the plan commission of that particular town. Sometimes they're called by different names, but it's usually planning and development, or sometimes it's called planning and zoning. It goes to that committee, which are people from the community that are volunteers. They're usually appointed by the mayor and confirmed by the city council. And the formal requirement is that at that time, once it's put on the agenda for the plan commission, that neighbors within a certain proximity to the piece of land, it's usually 200 to 500 feet, you have to get a formal notice that we're required to send through the city. There's a sign that gets put up on the piece of land that announces the date and time of the public hearing. And there's also an ad that has to be taken out in the local paper announcing it. That's the formal legal process. And then there's the actual hearing where we make our presentation and members of the public, including the neighbors, are allowed to get up and speak their mind about the project. What we do and what we found very, very successful is separate and apart from that formal process. About a month in advance of the actual meeting and the requirement to send out notices, we send an informal letter to all the neighbors, introducing ourselves, telling them the plan for the project. Usually send them 4-color copies of a site plan proposed for the project. By that time, we have that worked out. We also send them pictures of elevations, and we invite them to an informal coffee meeting in the evening. We usually rent space in the local library or a local recreational center near the neighborhood. And we bring our staff as well as our architect and engineer. We bring a professional. We've learned that we always engage in traffic projections and traffic studies. And we do really nice blow ups and charts of the proposal, give a little background about ourselves, make a little 5-minute presentation, and then just do an open questions and answers or walk people around to the different charts that we put up on easels. We have found that to be an extremely useful tool. It's a way to get feedback from the community to make sure they know we value their input, which we do. We've sometimes made changes as a result of those meetings by neighbor feedback, like moving buildings a little further back from the setback, adding trees and fencing where they want it, and really explain what we're doing so it's not a mystery and we'll just get a formal notice one day. Most of the time, all those neighbors leave those meetings very positive about the project. Often, some of those neighbors that are positive about the outreach will actually show up at public hearing and talk positively about the project. And it also gives us the ability selfishly to let the planning staff, the professional staff in that town, as well as at the public hearing, to let them know that we proactively reached out to the neighbors and we invited them all to an evening and share the feedback that we got from that meeting with them and let them know that we addressed many of the neighbors' concerns. It's a very highly effective tool for us that has worked very well in most communities.
What would be some questions potentially that somebody should be prepared for that maybe you've heard about during those meetings, but that helped you to know, hey, during the actual hearing, we need to address these things, or maybe something that you wouldn't typically think of?
Right. So, what neighbors rightfully are concerned about is, especially when you're dealing with either a raw piece of land or a piece of land that had a one-story building on it, obstructing their view if they're back up to the property, what their view is going to look like. So, a good shot of the elevations of what they'll look like and what the mature trees will look like that you're planting as a buffer is always something that comes up. The other thing that I alluded to that can't remember it not coming up in any process, including even with planning staff, is they want to know what's going to happen to traffic. What's the impact on traffic in their neighborhood? And it's going to be people racing through their street. Is that stop sign on the corner that they already got to wait too long for going to be a ridiculously long wait? So through the engineering firms, we use professional traffic engineers that do projections based on actually going out there with cameras and counting cars and then doing projections based on manuals for the number of units that are being built, projecting the number of cars, and they actually show the effect of traffic. Where it is really bad, it has a negative effect. We have methods to minimize that. We do more than one entrance and exit from the property. So we move some of the traffic away from just one point. We have left turn lanes and right turn lanes to get people queued up differently than just all in line and deal with it. And neighbors also want to know about parking because they don't want they want the introduction of a multifamily community in their neighborhood, especially if it's single family homes or townhomes, to be underparked where they're worried about people moving into the community or guests and of the residents parking in front of their house and clogging up their streets. So we show how we have adequate parking and do studies on that. The other common question, particularly where you're dealing with a raw piece of land, is neighbors want to make sure that they're not going to get flooded. The building of your community is not going to dump all kinds of water in their backyard. And it rarely does. And the city has codes. There's these engineers to do it. The city themselves have an internal engineer review it, but we just kind of explain that. That becomes a non-issue. The other item that some communities are concerned about, particularly those that have high-performing quality school districts, is the impact of bringing additional residents with school children into the neighborhood and the impact on the schools. And as a result, most communities have on new development an impact fee and upfront payment as part of our cost of the project, where a projection is made on how many new students will generate. And we actually have to pay the school district an impact fee. We have yet another independent firm that we use that does school impact studies. And in advance, we prepare those and we show how many students we generate, but we also prepare a report against the projected number of students that we generate, of how much additional real estate taxes this improvement we're going to make is going to generate on a yearly basis that's going to the school district that they now don't have, and show that there's really a minimal fiscal impact on the schools. So we kind of, over the years, know the questions that come up, and we like to have schools to answer those questions when they do.
No doubt about it. Well, that right there, I mean, what you just gave us is a great place to start. I feel like as somebody learning this process, you're going to be much better prepared just by hearing the last 10 minutes of what you just said. Yeah. I mean, it's like, that's so helpful. And no, like you said, I mean, you all are being proactive and having that get together with the community. So you're ready, right? With their questions when it's, time for that hearing. So I love that. I love thinking ahead like that and being proactive, and even coming to that meeting, like you gave many things that's going to help them be prepared with the printouts and the charts, and the having an engineer there and things that, hey, the community can even take back with them. And you're addressing many things that you already knows is concerns of theirs. Even going, you said going around the community as well and introducing yourself and giving them things in person. Is that right?
Yes, we do that. And we actually, that's going to come out in the public hearing anyway. So we actually mail them floor plans, site plans, elevations, just let them have it, let them see it. And one of the reasons we do that is we're very proud of the quality of what we build. We know it's going to be a quality product. Neighbors don't know us. They don't know that's going to be the case. And when they hear apartments, they think the worst. So we want to alleviate those concerns and let them know that they're really going to see a nice addition to their community.
Thank you for being with us again today. I hope that you have learned a lot from the show. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I hope you're telling your friends about the Real Estate Syndication Show and how they can also build wealth in real estate. You can also go to lifebridgecapital.com and start investing today.